I am continuing this workshop on supporting temporary distance learning with a discussion of how we can reduce barriers to learning in the synchronous online environment. One thing I want to preface this with is just an acknowledgement of the fact that there have been some phenomenal discussions of equity and access as students are told to leave campus, as instructors are told to leave campus, and as all of us are suddenly expected to shift to a new form of teaching and learning. And I also recognize that if you're a support person, if you're a TA, if you work in a center for teaching and learning, if you're someone else who's tasked with assisting instructors in this transition, then the decision to have synchronous sessions or to have some other format of online learning is probably out of your hands. So when I talk about reducing barriers to learning, I want to both acknowledge that there are really significant issues of equity that are important to grapple with. And I also want to acknowledge that the people I am speaking to right now are not the ones who are able to make final decisions on that. And so I am providing you with skills that will work in the context you're given, which is synchronous online learning. So, in a previous segment on planning with instructors, I spoke briefly at the end about cognitive load. One thing you can do to reduce barriers to learning is take steps to reduce cognitive load. So, in a situation where you have slides to read on the screen, students are conversing in the chat window, the instructor is speaking, and everyone's expected to refer to some other handout that was shared before session, there are a lot of streams of information happening that people are expected to process simultaneously. That is a lot of cognitive load. Some things you can do to reduce that. You can share slides, handouts, a preview of activities, maybe a session outline with students in reminders before class. And in the description to this YouTube video, we'll link to a sample reminder email from a recent CIRTL Network workshop where you can see what that looks like. At least for the first few sessions, as folks really acclimate to this new learning environment, I also recommend giving directions for activities verbally and on slides, and to be explicit in those directions. It is much better in this instance to err on the side of over-explaining and realize you can pare that down for the next activity you do in a session or for the next week, than to give too little instruction and have students be overwhelmed, uncertain, and leave a session with a level of dissatisfaction, which they may attribute to the online learning environment. This is something that a support person who can attend synchronous sessions can do. It's also something that a support person who cannot attend synchronous sessions can encourage instructors to take into consideration. Similarly, everything takes longer in the online environment. So to the extent that we can minimize the number of tools used in a given session, that will reduce the number of things students have to learn and orient themselves to, and speed up their ability to hear, think, and respond. Also, make sure that you leave plenty of time for students to figure out tools the first few times they're used. And when I tools, I mean that most platforms for synchronous learning have a chat window. They have breakout rooms. They have screen sharing capabilities where you might screen share some kind of like collaborative group document. They have, the ability to speak with a microphone and use a webcam. So all of those things are tools in the online environment. Another thing that support people attending synchronous sessions or support people providing guidance to instructors ahead of sessions can really encourage is to prioritize interaction, not how people interact. I do recommend that you offer students written and verbal options for interacting. You might encourage discussion when you throw a question out to your students or when the instructor throws a question out to students, but you can also welcome written interaction. That is a helpful rule in general. It is especially a helpful rule when we're all learning under unexpected and changing circumstances. In sessions, and this is especially key for support people who can attend sessions, focus on finding ways for your students to interact. Outside of sessions, you can spend time trying to troubleshoot issues that may have prevented them from interacting in a planned and intentional way. But in sessions, don't worry about troubleshooting. Just find a way to get people to interact. And at the end of this workshop where I talk through what could go wrong, I'll share some tips that can help prioritize interaction. And then last, general good practice when you're online, avoid confusing background noise. This is a recommendation for that support folks can provide to instructors, and also a key one for them to adopt themselves when they're attending synchronous sessions. Mute your mic when you're in a session and you're not speaking. Join from a quiet place as best you're able, and wear headphones, headset, earbuds. Now, if this were a synchronous session, I would ask folks to comment in the chat window with what they do to reduce barriers to learning. Many approaches that people rely on in face-to-face learning can be modified to work in the online environment. And so one thing that I want to emphasize as we all transition to this new teaching and learning environment is we don't have to recreate the wheel. What we need to do, which is hard, is take time to reflect on our current practices and pause to think through how we might adjust them for this new learning environment. And that's where support people really come into play, because it's our job to help think through that transition. So if you are yourself a support person tasked with answering some of these questions, then I just want to emphasize that CIRTL is a resource for you. You can reach out to us. We're running additional workshops where we can help you think through some of these issues that you may very well be expected to have answers to. Next up, we'll talk about how you can support synchronous sessions.